welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. I am Tobias Berblinger, and this is Will Lacoma, and we are your hosts for this evening. Together we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you.
As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you are all now members provided you adhere to our philosophy.
Ex Curiositas Scientia.
We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens and excites us and makes us hungry for more.
And now we are very happy to introduce Mark Keppinger. Mark manufactures high-quality tube theremins here in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. Everyone next slide.
Thank you, Will and Tobias, and thank you, Curiosity Club and Hand-Eye Supply, for having me this evening. A little bit about me. I've been in electronics my entire life. I was one of those lucky people. Growing up, I was bad at everything else, so it kind of meant you're going into electronics. And I've always really enjoyed the unusual and the fringe edge, and not just like Tesla coils and Jacob's ladders, but I like the things that people haven't seen a little bit. I worked in electronics my whole life. The vast majority of that has been in industry. Well, I did amusement game repair for a while. Repaired televisions for about a month and absolutely hated it, and I learned how many people have TVs that don't work. I saw the documentary on Theremin in, I think around 1993, and I had never heard of a Theremin, and I was surprised I'd never heard of one because I'd read every electronic book on everything strange, I thought. And of course, immediately, having recently got the internet, I got to find out about these things. And well, in '93 there wasn't nearly as much information or misinformation out there as there is now. And I immediately found at least a dozen people that said, I'm now going to be building theremins. And everyone had talked about it. Some of them claimed they were, but they wouldn't show anyone. And I thought, well, this is silly. There was the Big Briar, or Bob Moog of Moog synthesizer fame, the Ether Wave, a great little theremin, and there wasn't a whole lot else, but a lot of people talked about it. And there is a news group that I used to be a member of, but I got tired of all the name calling. My theremin's bigger than yours and so forth. And I thought, well, I could do this, and I figured out 6 months I'll have a theremin designed. So, and I embarked on building a theremin. And in electronics, traditionally, you want circuitry to be stable, not affected by anything else. When you turn on a TV, a computer, a monitor, you don't want everything to interact. You want everything to be pretty much isolated and immune. Theremins are designed with circuitry that is the opposite. You want to have instability. You want to have an oscillator so that when you hook an antenna to the grid, you put your hand near it, the capacitance will affect it. It will change the frequency. Normally, if you had that kind of circuitry, let's say in your stereo, when you walked up to your stereo, it would change stations. So just the nature of the circuitry is quite a bit different. Theremins were invented during the advent of radio. Back then, in the early 20s, where you can build a radio receiver, but what are you going to listen to? Now you got to build a radio transmitter, and someone has to use it so you can listen to it. So it was, the whole industry had to come up together. It wasn't like there was already radio and you build one and you can listen to it like there is now. So going through it, and I always believe that you should not make the same mistakes someone else did. You should make them in a different way, and I made plenty of those. And I looked at the traditional theremin circuitry, which is sort of bizarre, and conventional ham radio circuitry of the 1930s and 40s was pretty typical of the kind of circuits that it seemed to be. Every 10 years or so, there would be in one of the electronic magazines an article on how to build a theremin. And some of them were really good, and some of them were a little weird, like they used the parts that were available at the time. Today you can't go out and buy a Mullen 12D oscillator coil or whatever, so you have to make your own. So I like the idea of hand-wound, what are called air coils, which are these coils that we see here. And as the people in the news groups call them, big honkin' coils. My first theremin I built, and I first got the pitch section working. Now, the way the theremin generates a pitch, if anyone remembers high school physics, I don't, but I have been told I was present. You have two frequencies you mix together, and you get four outputs. You get the two original frequencies, you get the sum and the difference. The sum we don't care about, that's too high for us to even filter out. The difference we're interested in that. So if we take, in the case of theremins, they typically use for the pitch circuitry around 200 kilohertz. If you use a much higher frequency, you get a much larger range. And if you use a lower frequency, you get a smaller range. Now, there's sort of a false mentality out there that the better the range, the better you're off. That's not really true. Let's say, for an analogy, you take the gas pedal in your car and you make it so in 1 inch you go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. Now, that's the equivalent of having a theremin with extreme range. Yes, you can move your hand like this and you have 8 octaves, but try hitting one note and staying on it. Anyway, 200 kilohertz is, in that area, is pretty much the ideal frequency for playing theremins. And no one's asked yes, but yes, everyone gets to play the theremin afterwards. Some probably better than others. That's okay. So I settle on the frequency, and you have other things. You have AM radio stations. You'll have harmonics, fundamentals. If we were on the coast, we would have submarines which use long wave, which is in the same frequency. So you can get all kinds of interference and so forth. So I got the oscillators working fine. Now what you do is you have one oscillator that is a fixed frequency, and that's the middle coil right here. Same thing on the big one, just a little easier to see. That one is always 200 kilohertz. The one next to it is slightly lower than 200 kilohertz. Let's say it's 199.5 kilohertz. So we have a 500 hertz difference. This is connected right into the oscillator circuit. So when we put our hand near it, it loads it down, and the frequency can't go as fast, so it slows down. So when this frequency lowers and this one stays the same, the difference becomes greater. So let's say we load it down to 198 kilohertz. Well, we now have a 2 kilohertz difference, and that is the tone that is going to come out. The volume control is much more unorthodox. It uses also its own transmitter, and they're typically around 400, 430 kilohertz. And it's set up as sort of a regular transmitter, but when you put your hand near it, it loads it down. They take that voltage, turn it into a DC, and use that to essentially scrunch the audio waveforms. So when your volume control is up full, it allows the audio through. When you put your hand near this, it's just clamping the waveform.
So basically just gets louder as you pull it away.
Yes, that is traditional, and that is the way they've always been done. When you move your hand away, the volume gets louder, which is kind of weird because when you're done playing and you walk away from the instrument, it goes whoop. So anyway, after I built my first one, I'd gotten some metal chassis made by a guy who worked at my former employer who I'd always helped out on his projects. And he went ahead and punched me like 20 sets of chassis. I only wanted one. I thought, wow. So anyway, I built one up, and I put out a call on Craigslist to any musicians or wannabe musicians in the community who want to play with a theremin, and you can only imagine how many responses I got. And what I did is I took it to each person, and they could have it for a few days, and I wanted them to make a list of what they liked and what they didn't like. And I would let problems cancel out. Like if one person said the volume control is too sensitive, the next person said the volume control isn't sensitive enough, I would cancel that out. And originally I had a long list. There was some squealing and things that it did when you touch the antennas. And by the very end I had it down so there were really no significant complaints. And I put a little blurb out on the news group, and I didn't claim I was making theremins until I had one to show everyone. And I took some pictures of it, and it was actually sort of like a cardboard box cut out like this one with the chassis just sort of suspended and everything taped there. And webmaster of Theremin World, a website, he got a hold of me and he said, "Wow, that's great. Any way I could, take a look at it and play it?" And I said, "Sure, I'll send it to you. Where are you at?" And he said, "I'm in Seattle. I work for Microsoft." I thought, "Well, I'll drive up and see you." So went up there and hung out for a day, and what a nice guy, Jason. He now is on the East Coast, but about the same time, John Spencer with the Blues Explosion had his theremin stolen. And he got on the website and he got a hold of Theremin World and he said, "I need a good tube theremin." And Jason gave him my home phone number, says, "Call this guy, maybe he can help you." I was working late that night and I was letting my front room be used by a bunch of local musicians that were rehearsing, and the phone rang. They went over to listen to the answering machine to see if it was for one of them, and I said, "Hi, this is John Spencer with the Blues Explosion." They all like, "Whoa!" So anyway, I came home and I had like 6 crazy musicians running at me. "Oh my God, you're not going to believe who called you." And I'd heard of John Spencer. I wasn't really familiar with his music, but I called him back and he says, "Well, I'm going to be in town in a couple weeks. Can you show me what you have?" I said, "Sure." So I went down to the Crystal Ballroom and I just mentioned my name and it was red carpet treatment. And, "Oh, would you like a beer? Would you like a wine? How about some food?" And met with John, just the nicest guy. And I didn't really know what to expect, but he's actually very intellectual and just a really genuinely nice guy. It reminded me of the Wayne's World, the Alice Cooper scene. So anyway, I showed him my theremin. They were supposed to be doing a sound check, and he kept kind of drifting over to the theremin, and they would call him back. And he said, "Well, I want it." And I said, "Well, let me build a box or something for it." So one of the cabinet makers I work with said he'd build me cabinets, and I decided to go ahead and build 8 of them. I had acquired enough parts for 8, and John got the first one. And he later had me add a feature to it. He wanted to be able to have a mute pedal he could step on, and it would unmute it, and it would come to life, and he could mute it again, and it would be off. And not a problem. So the next time he's in town, we met up, and I did that work for him. Then, I had 7 more. This is one of them. So there are 7 in the world beside this one that I made. And people say, "Well, why don't you still make that one?" Materials cost only today would be about $1,100. There is more money in the chrome alone in this thing than you can buy an ether wave for. But some people just really like this, and some people, money's no object. So I put one on eBay, and immediately the Theremin news group, they're kind of like gossipy women, old women, like the neighbor who always watches you. And they say, "I can tell that's not an original. What's not supposed to be an original?" So anyway, and the guy who bought it had a recording studio in Hawaii, and he did sort of an independent review. I didn't ask him to, and all of a sudden everyone wanted one. So I sold a few more, and I think there are 3 in Europe right now, and the other 4, I'm not really sure where all of them are. And not much longer, I decided I got to get a website up and going. So I had a friend who said, "I can make you a website." And I'm so ashamed to admit that website's been up like 8 or 9 years, and it has never been updated. But I don't know what I'd do if it was. I get enough inquiries, and I love to answer questions. And fairly recently, Russia, where the theremin was invented, the theremin has been unknown there. And I kind of wondered about that, because we had that Russian restaurant in Southeast Portland for a while, and they had musician night. And I thought, okay, so I showed up with a theremin, and they thought I was a nut. I said, "It's Russian." They said, "No, it's not." So that was a very short-lived performance. So anyway, I have this website, and I sold a few on eBay, and I'm getting other inquiries. Fishbone contacted me, but they wanted something that weighed like 4 pounds. This is not it. And I got some other interesting inquiries also. And I also corresponded with Bob Moog a few times. And I actually was in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was really hoping I could meet up with him, but he was unavailable that day. And he passed away a short time later. And that was just, it would have been a chance in a lifetime. His last email, he suggested I was a lunatic. And what a compliment coming from such a great guy. Well, actually, the context was anyone who would build theremins for income like he does, is a lunatic. So, anyway, after he passed away, his company real quickly fell out of favor with the electronics community. They said, we're no longer going to service our products. You'll have to buy new ones, and if you want to repair it, you're on your own, because they took all their schematics offline. And it just suddenly made everyone really bitter toward them. And about that time, I decided I had used up enough of my life building these. Actually, it wasn't all me. After like the second or third one, I was contacted by a musician and electronics enthusiast here in Portland. He said, oh my God, I gotta have one. I gotta have one. He said, I don't have much money. I said, tell you what, I'll sell you one for parts if you complete the rest of them. And he did, and he would spend just hours tuning it, getting it to sound just the way he wanted to. And then I had people requesting that he tune them. So, and he's still around. He's busy and not involved in my current adventure, although we still touch base on occasion. Anyway, so after the musician community pretty much was not real happy with the Moog company not providing support, I thought this was a golden opportunity. What I did is I published not only my schematics, which I'd already given to a few people anyway, all the engineering information. I said you need a 3.05 inch coil with 1,175 turns of wire. The shorter one is 600 turns of wire, number 32 gauge enamel close wound. And the first guy who built one, he said it almost cost him a wife. But the Theremin news group, the people that were working on specifically the design I came up with, splintered off, and they now have a group called Keppinger. It's a Yahoo news group, Kepp Theremins, and it's people who just build theremins based on my design. I totally encourage them to experiment and do crazy things, and they do. But one of them started keeping a registry, and he's tracked down most of the originals. And of those, there's at least one company bought one that doesn't want to disclose who they are. And I respect their mouse ears, and I won't say. So is this being televised? Anyway. I was getting a lot of questions like, where do you get this, where do you get that? And the biggest question is, where do you get the tubing that the coils wound on? Well, that tubing was used for many years for radio coils, but that hasn't been the case for probably 40, 50 years. Anyone want to guess what this is now used for? What? Not a bad guess.
Potato cannons.
That's closer. Model rocketry. These are model rocket tubes sawed in half. And they look kind of like cardboard. It's actually resin impregnated phenolic. There's some fancy name which means brittle cardboard. And that's what they're wound out of. But after the first ones, they look like cardboard, so I went ahead and painted them. When I put my Theremin together, all of a sudden, everything is way off. Like, what went wrong? And I'm just scratching my head trying to figure out the frequencies are all different. The paint that I used had ferrous oxide or iron in it, which changes induction. So, and when you call the paint manufacturer's rep and you ask what's in the paint, they think you're really weird. And then they want to know why. And it's too hard to explain. You give them your website, then they think you're even weird. So, it's been fun. So, then the John Spencer Blues Explosion came back to town a couple weeks ago. And I got to talking to John, and he wanted to know what else I've been up to. And something else I thought it'd be kind of fun to do is, if anyone looked inside, you'd see all the metal chassis and so forth, and this weighs more than my pickup, I think. And I thought it'd be kind of fun. I design circuit boards for a living. And in real life, I work at OMSI as an electronics designer. I know it's a big shock to everyone. Yeah, it's a pretty cool job. You don't do the same thing twice. Unless you're doing something over that someone else had done the first time. So anyway, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a circuit board version of this, and we have a bunch of musicians here, I'm sure. How many people know what a 6L6 is? Okay, that's all right. 12AX7? Okay. Anyway, The first thing people say is, you can't get the tubes anymore. Yes, you can. They're all available, so surplus. I can get any tube in here for $2, and that's if I pay too much for them. And I have a lot of them in my basement and so forth. So I designed a circuit board. This is strictly a prototype board, which means it probably has errors, mistakes, and so forth. Did anyone look at my website? Way outdated website. I named this the Model K after my friend Kaya Harden, the gal who was posing with the Theremin. Does anyone recognize what photo that was spoofing? Okay, if you're a diehard Theremin enthusiast, you'd be so offended. There was a Theremin player named Clara Rockmore. She was featured in the Theremin video. Well, that pose of Kaya was a total spoof on Clara Rockmore, and even that sweater she's wearing, I wanted to do the same Art Nouveau design. I remember drawing on her with a felt pen, and she said, "That's tickling." I said, "Sorry," you know. So anyway, it's a total spoof, and of course, when I put it on my website, people are saying, "Is she really playing the Theremin?" Like, no, you guys, you know. So anyway, the Model K is named in her memory. Wonderful person, we'll miss her. And I had originally ordered 2 circuit boards from my supplier. Well, somewhere between here and China, the 2 circuit boards got turned into 20 circuit boards. So I'm wondering, what the heck am I going to do with 20? I like one to have and one to look at to find your mistakes, which you usually have on prototypes. And I mentioned it to one of the guys in the news group, and he says, "Oh my God, send me one." And so I sent him one, and word of mouth kind of got out, and there are like 14 sets out there now. And this is not a do-it-yourself kit. This is a prototype, and this is how far I've gotten on it. It's not up and working yet, but if there are any electronic enthusiasts that want to tackle something like that, you'll have to email me, and I'll send you the schematics and information. I have 2 sets available. First 2 hands up. Okay.
Awesome.
Right there.
I knew that you were going to have one up.
There'll probably be Now, this isn't the first Theremin I designed. I teach a class at PNCA called Electronics for Artists, which is pure lunacy. And you have some things that are kind of past the end of the spectrum. We had one guy in the class, and he looked so Ted Bundy. He's just your normal next door neighbor. But usually people come to the class, they want to do something that requires electrics or electronics, and they just don't know where to go, and they hear about this class. Well, he brought a beef tongue to class. He wanted to automate it so it would make a licking motion. Okay. Don't ask, don't tell policy. But Brett was just the nicest guy. You would have never guessed this. And I think the creepiest thing is he looked way too normal. You know, he didn't have purple hair or silver studs through his neck or your typical art student, you know, no tattoos of a spider on his face or whatever. He's just a normal, everyday guy, and that was the creepiest part. But there are some things in life you can go to a lot of libraries and not find any information on, and automating a beef tongue is one of them. So what do? We bring in a beef tongue, and I had a bunch of motors from dollar bill changers, the ones that grab your dollar bill and push it in, and the mechanism was just perfect. So we had it hooked up, and a beef tongue will last for 30 to 40 minutes before, like, it breaks in half. Or it just kind of ripped, actually. It was pretty gross. Yeah, I thought I was going to lose a lot of people in the class. So, well, the next class, we went to Plan B. He molded a rubber beef tongue. But it didn't look real, so we set up an aquarium pump that would spritz water on it. And, the last I heard, someone said he had put it on the hood of his Ford Pinto and hooked it up to the brake light switch. So when you come up and stop, this okay, now you get the idea. But for the class, I did what I called a $4 Theremin. And it's similar to the ones you see on, has anyone ever looked at Theremins on eBay? And you say, it says Theremin, just like Led Zeppelin, and it has this thing for $35. It's an optical theremin. They're not real theremins. They generate the waveform using cadmium sulfide photocells. I just happen to have two here. And these are the same things that determine that it's dark outside and it's time to turn your yard lights on, or the street lights. And that's about all they're good for, I think. But they're really cool in music. You can hook these to a voltage control oscillator or something, and when you put a shadow over them, the pitch changes. Hook them in the volume circuit. And actually, it's not really a $4 theremin. I have them down to like $1.30 and they sound like it. But when you have a whole bunch of them going at once, they're pretty interesting. I just happen to have one circuit board, and I'll throw in the photocells for a cadmium sulfide theremin. Who wants it? Oh, oops. You know where I live.
I do.
So that brings us up to today. A couple weeks ago, I heard that John Spencer was coming to town, and usually he sends me an email well in advance. And I shot him an email to his personal address, and he said they're on their way back from Tokyo. He said at the last minute they got 3 shows, one in Seattle, Portland, and I think it was Eugene. And he says, but I don't have your theremin with me. He didn't want to ship one of those to Tokyo. Getting these through customs is really interesting. I sent this one to the Southern California Theremin Players Convention. Yes, there is such a thing. And when it came back, I thought the guy who had shipped it back was a joke. But I took it out of a crate, and it had like a mile of bright yellow Homeland Security inspection tape on it. And I called him, and he didn't know anything about it. I said, are you sure? And I asked FedEx who shipped it, and they said, oh yeah, they open up all kinds of stuff. They have some that they check the packages with, and who knows what this would look like on an X-ray or something. Don't try to take one through an airport. So anyway, John came into Portland, and he said, I'll get you tickets. And so I went down there and saw them, and he says, well, let's hang out for a bit after the show. And he said, see Rachel if you need anything. Rachel's his tour manager. And so after the show, they were trying to herd everyone out, and I waited over near the stage door, and some guy says, bait it. And I said, I'm here to see John. And he says, bait it. And I'm trying to remember what's her name, Rachel. So I asked Rachel. All of a sudden, the red carpet comes out again, and I get an escort all the way down and get to hang out with the band guys and talk to John for a bit. And he kept apologizing for not having the boat anchor with him. Like, I hope he wouldn't drag that to Japan. He took the one I made for him that's just like this on a tour of New Zealand and Australia. But anyway, I said, well, let me make you a touring model. He says, really? And I said, yeah. And I said, well, let's talk about it. And I said, I noticed you're not using the volume control. This is all inside information. And he says, yeah, remember that mute pedal? I said, yeah. He says, I just walk up, I step on that, and I'm good to go. He says, I just need one hand. So I said, okay, I'll build you one, but it'll have a fake volume loop, if you just need a mute pedal. And anyway, he gave me a bunch of his CDs, and this one is, I think it's orange. It has a sketch of his idea of a theremin on it. And it's one of those things that when you draw something that you've looked at and you're not looking at it, it ends up not really looking like anything. Like if you draw a car, is the trim below the window, above the window? Is the door handle up or down, left or right? I don't know. And then you draw what you think it looks like, and then you look at it, and there are really no cars that look like that. The Theremin's sort of the same way. He drew this picture of it, and I said, well, why don't I make something that has a visual element? And he says, that's great. And I thought, well, it's ready. And I said, give me 6 months. And that was about a month ago, so I have 5 months to go. And I'm trying to come up with something that no one else has done. I thought it'd be fun to throw a few sound features in that no one in their right mind would ever put in a theremin. Does anyone know what a sample and hold circuit is?
Yeah.
Musicians.
That'd be cool.
Well, I thought it'd be fun to incorporate a sample and hold that is clocked. So instead of the theremin, the pitch going, ooh, it would step, and you could set the rate. So no one's done that. Probably a good reason why.
Something that's pitch dependent, so that it would always, because if you sample and hold and then you go 2 steps too far, it would sound dissonant. So you have to put some kind of filter in it. So
yeah, well, there are pitch correcting circuits, but this wouldn't be that. This would
not
be
a corrector, but just so it will only accent the fundamental, or only.
I also had played with the idea of a polyphonic theremin, That'd be, I mean, I looked at the circuitry and thought,
Have you
geez, it's
pulled
like
apart
building a
one of those
spaceship.
pods, those polyphonic generators?
Yeah. No, I'm aware of it. I haven't had a chance to play them a lot.
That was the April Fool's.
I've got one. You want to look at mine?
Sure, I'll play with anything once.
Yeah.
And I promise not to take it apart too much.
Yeah, it's really expensive.
So anyway, I was trying to figure out what I'm going to build John, and I wanted to do something visual. So it pretty much, you're limited to light
Yeah.
or have it move, but you don't want it to move because you're trying to play it. And at work we were cleaning house, and they had a few remnant sheets of milk acrylic plastic, and I thought, oh my gosh. So if you've looked at that picture on the front, I haven't quite finished the case yet,
Cool.
but
Where light can go through and reflect it. Is that what you're thinking too?
do what?
Like you can put a light behind it and make it glow.
You are so right. No, but it is not just going to glow. I actually built one of these for another project once, where it's like, does anyone remember the 70s light organs that change color with the music?
Oh yeah, totally.
And that was when you could have a whole conversation using the word, whoa. Well, you have a single pitch here, and I thought it'd be really cool, and with a monophonic instrument, you can get away with this, where you take the single pitch and you make it into a single frequency. And I do it in analog. I'm just an analog guy. You could probably do it with one microcontroller somewhere, but I'd rather have a shoebox full of chips. It's much cooler looking. So when the pitch starts out at the very bottom, as it's going up, it turns blue. Then as the blue comes off, the green comes up, then yellow, then red. So it goes through the rainbow. So when he's going woo 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 woo, the thing is giving people seizures.
And you would just do that with LEDs.
Absolutely.
Because it's super voltage control. It's just easy as it's going through.
Yeah, and the world is full of LEDs now. And I remember in 1980 when the blue LED came out. I worked at Tektronix at the time, and the manufacturer's rep came around. They had this thing like in a suitcase locked to his arm or something. It was like, wow. And one of the gals there said, well, I hear they're working on a white LED. And we laughed because you can't have a white LED. They totally cheat. If anyone knows how they make a white LED, it's just like a fluorescent light. Those actually have UV, and then they're exciting a phosphor. An LED is the same way. There's a little, it's called a dopant, I think. It's the equivalent of phosphor, but a white LED is actually blue. If you look behind it, you'll see a tiny blue dot. So, but anyway, blue LEDs were a fortune, and white LEDs didn't exist. And I remember one of the gals in our group took an LED, one of the clear ones, put it in a panel and put a little incandescent lamp behind it and made it look like a demo box and was showing us, and we're like, whoa. So, but not going to use white in this one. But I have 4 controls. He has 4 knobs drawn on the front, and I got to make them do something useful and cool. So, any questions?
So I understand like the benefits of tube amplification in guitar amps is generally about the qualities of distortion. What is it, and what is it? Why do you choose that as opposed to transistors for a Theremin?
I've done transistors also. It kind of reminds me of a friend of mine many years ago. He'd bought a Ferrari. It was like a 308. It was one of the, what do you call it, a starter model?
Magnum, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't one of the ones that they insure for $8 trillion, but it was still a Ferrari, and he had the specs on it there, and I was looking at the specs, and I thought, wow, this is probably similar to like a Toyota Camry, other than the RPM. And I asked him, and I says, does this really, the acceleration, there are a bunch of things about it that were not much different than a car you buy off the lot. And he said, oh, no, he said, it's not what it does, it's how it does it. And I like that. How something does it makes it from something that's $100 to $1,000. I graduated from high school in '76, and by that time the United States had pretty much gone to semiconductors, but our high school was behind the times. and we had all the tube stuff. So I got to learn tube stuff, and I got my first job at a little company long gone called Exact Electronics. They made waveform generators, oscillators, more for industry than music, but they were just so way cool to play with. And the engineers there were somewhere between amused, annoyed, and frustrated with me, because I'd get them to ask me how to do a circuit, and then I'd do it with tubes. They're like, no, you know, that is so out. And an interesting side note is when American technology shifted to semiconductors, the Russians kept on going with tubes, and that's why you find Russian tubes are in demand. Sovtek is one of the big names, and there are probably a few others that people really like. It's a different feel as far as the electronics goes. And you have a little bit of microphonics that's an element, and when you have a voltage that increases on the plate with respect to the grid and the cathode, you'll get a very, very slight fluctuation that gives you a sound you really can't easily recreate in solid state. And it's in the mind of the beholder. I remember many years ago, I used to restore antique jukeboxes, and I went and looked at one this lady had, and she pushed a button in the 78 that had been played so many times the needle was almost coming out the bottom of the record. Does anyone know what a 78 is? Okay, just checking. You know, it's kind of like a CD, but it's black and it's thick and it's heavy. Anyway, she puts a record on this thing, and oh my God, it sounded like a cat fight. She says, I love this tone. Like you couldn't even hear it. So, but you know, in her mind it was good, therefore it was good. So that's where we're at. Questions? More questions?
When you're winding your coils, do you have a particular machine or method that helps you out, or you
Excellent question.
get some turns?
The first one or two I did, I was trying to do them by hand. It was really frustrating. After that, I figured there had to be an easier way, and I took an old machinist. I think it's a pulley reduction arbor, and it had a 5/8 shaft hole in it. So I took an old foosball table rod, put it in there, perfect, because it has little holes for the men. And I made some wooden cones I could slide on there, and I had a big long spring. I would slide on there, and I'd push it, and I'd put a nail in the hole where the men would normally go. And I put a crank on the end, and I'd turn the crank and feed the wire in manually, and I would do a coil a night. It's called Not Having a Life. When I was really tired, I would do the volume oscillator coil, because that one's like 10 minutes. These are about 15 each. These are about 45 minutes and half an hour respectively.
You ever have to stop, back up, and rewind?
You know, if I would watch it real carefully, or the way I did it when I was winding, you interested in technique? When I was winding from one end, well, you start at one end obviously, and you wind toward the middle, and I'd run my finger on it, and you can feel with your finger if the wire jumps over, and I'd use my fingernail to push the wire up against the next coil, and if it jumps over, you feel it instantly, so you only have to go back about a half a turn. Why don't you motorize it? Well, I tried that too. I put a sewing machine motor on it, but the problem is, if you have a problem and you're running a motor, you have like 800 turns to go back by the time you get it stopped. Not quite that many, but also I had a counter, and it would click. And if you have to go back, then you have to remember how many turns you went back, then add that to the counter, do I add, do I subtract? It's not really that critical. If you have a coil with a few more or a few less turns, it doesn't affect the overall performance.
They're definitely part of the visual appeal as well as the function.
Oh, absolutely. And my prototype, when I brought up to John Spencer, like I said, I didn't have the cabinet, and he was running his fingers all over the inside. I told him there's nothing to talk about. And he loved being able to touch the coils and he always had some of his,
So I'm neither an electrician or a musician, but I am curious. What's the typical theremin that you always see? The flat one?
That's the ether wave. There's another one that's fairly common. It's by a company called, is it Paia? P-A-I-A? And it's a kit form, I believe. And we have one at the museum, but they keep forgetting and putting it out when they're running the Van de Graaff generator. And the tubes would really care less. I mean, a lightning bolt could hit them and it's not going to change anything. Something sensitive, solid state, when you have arcs jumping 2 feet to it, it does care.
So what was it called?
The Big Briar is the most common. That's the one you find at the musician stores. They're about $350. The Paya one is probably quite a bit less. And then the ones you see on eBay, they're like $35. They're really, really horrible. And if you want to see one that's even worse, go to YouTube and Google cat playing theremin. Has anyone seen that?
I feel like I might have.
Someone out of Japan was exporting these for a while. It's a tiny theremin, and it actually is a woo woo, so there's no volume. But they have this sitting here, and this cat walks up and starts batting this thing. And the more that it bats it, the crazier the sounds get. And pretty soon this other cat joins in. It's pretty nuts. and of course, the theremin purists, the ones who hang out and talk about theremins all day long, they're just livid. You know, I think they'd be happy because a lot of people would never know what a theremin was if it wasn't for something really stupid like that. I grew up in Hillsborough, not far from here, and when I first started doing this, my parents had just retired, and I set my mother up with a computer, showed her how to use it, and she would sometimes Google my name to see what I was up to, see if I show up on arrest records or whatever. Anyway, she saw us where she said, "What is that thing?" And I thought it was so weird, I don't know anyone who doesn't know it, but there is a line, and it's between Beaverton and Raleigh Hills. It's called the Theremin Knowledge Line. When you cross that line, no one knows what a theremin is. And it's funny because I have a crazy garage sale every couple of years. I don't have baby clothes, I don't have tools, I have like antique shock treatment machines and just anything bizarre you can imagine. And I always put a theremin out, and it's like a big people magnet. But I brought it out to my parents in Hillsborough, and they're calling all the neighbors who are coming over, and they're like, "What is it?" And they're standing back about 10 feet. And as you get more rural, that's more and more the case. I also play piano, and every year I give a recital up in Klickitat, Washington, near where my cabin is. And every year I always try to do something a little different, really different. Even if it's not music related. I had a Segway and I brought it up there. And these are people, and they say, talk about going into the big city, they're talking about Hood River. So anyway, 3 years ago, I brought this baby up there and I set it out, and it's just real quiet, everyone's watching, and then I start playing it and they're all just looking at me like I'm a nut. Anyway, some of the kids thought it was pretty cool. They came up and the parents wouldn't go anywhere near it. Anyway, so I played a couple of almost recognizable tunes on it. And anyway, one of the farmers up there, he came up there and looked at it and said, "Do that again." So I did it. I played it again. He says, "One more time." So I did that too. And he says, "That all that thing does."
Would you play a recognizable tune for us?
How recognizable?
It doesn't matter to me. I just would love
You know you're
I
bad
would love
when
to
you
see
play and people break out singing with you and they're singing a song that you didn't know you were Yeah, it's a little, I'll try to play a real hard one. It's one of those, if you're playing honky tonk on the piano, as long as you get about 30% of the notes right, everyone's going to recognize it.
Everybody can get it here.
About 2.5 to 3.5 octaves, roughly.
Where's the same? Cool.
Next.
Go for seal.
Tobias.
It really is like, I mean, on the deeper wave theremin, and it's way more vocal sounding, you know?
I thought violin was hard to play. This is joyous.
The people who play violins tend to do much better on this than otherwise, because the spacing is similar.
Does the shape of the box change the tone
No.
quality of it?
Not really, the speaker is separate.
Oh. Didn't see that.
No one asked about the shape of the antennas. I have a theory on that that's a departure from anyone else's. All the purists say, well, that's just the way they're supposed to be. I suspect that originally this stuck out a lot further, and my guess is they bent it in because someone got skewered by it.
And it has to be at a 90-degree angle from the other antenna.
It's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have them both the same way, the interference is worse than it is now. If you listen and hear a slight whistle, it's a little bit of, they call those birdies. In Portland, they're different than elsewhere, and I think that's probably because some of the radio stations are mixing with it. Anyone else?
And the older sound records interfere with it as well, like edge.
Oh yeah, the older ones, I call them the British sports cars of electronics. You have to constantly tune them. This one's a little better.
What's the metric for when it's in tune or out of tune? Like, because there's
don't
no
really
like
continue,
hard
yeah.
place where it's supposed to be a certain thing, right?
Yeah, you put it at the register that you want to play at.
Okay.
Now when you walk away from it, it'll be at what we call null or zero or close. Yeah. Right there. This is where I set it up. I had a really annoying mailman for a while, and I put this out there. So as he approaches the porch, he goes, I didn't get mail for like a week.
This would be a great alarm system for a house, just wiring your entire house into this thing in the middle.
That's funny you mentioned that. Back in the prototype stages, I had a house sitter who was real curious about everything I did, and I left the theremin out. I said, okay, you can play with the theremin. At the time, I had a couple guinea pigs, and I said, you know, feed the guinea pigs, and so I left the theremin out. And when I came home, I'd been traveling for work. When I came home, I hear the theremin just going nuts. What is that? I went up there, and the theremin was next to the guinea pig cage, and the wire was hooked to it. And neighbor had made an alarm because whenever the guinea pigs heard the door close, they would be fed. They start running around.
Ruth Goldberg would be proud.
Any more questions?
What's next for you in theremin technology after this project?
I'll get this one going, and I've looked at, it'd have to be solid state, doing a polyphonic theremin, and actually one that, it was sort of a very, very bizarre project. It's one of those you wonder why no one else has done it, and then you start doing it and you figure out why. How many people know what a Hammond B3 is? Hands. It's one of the classic organs, the solos on Let It Be, House of the Rising Sun, anything Creedence Clearwater Revival did, a lot of the Beatles stuff. That's a Hammond organ. And their tone is generated mechanically, not electronically. They have spinning magnetic discs and little coils that pick it up. And that frequency is synchronized to 60 hertz in America, and that's what determines that it's in tune. And I thought, wouldn't it be really fun to be able to vary that? And I was thinking of, it would be like a theremin, but I'd use a regular keyboard, but I'd have a speed control. So if you have a chord, it would go up and down and it would stay proportional. And it just sounded really weird. It didn't sound bad, it was kind of like Pink Floyd probably sounded like in the 60s. Like, what's that?
Could be worse.
Yeah, I might revisit that. The Forerunner to the theremin, it's not really fair to say a Forerunner, a previous electric musical instrument. Has anyone ever heard of a teleharmonium? Really? I'm so impressed. The teleharmonium was a musical instrument. There was like a 2-octave keyboard, and it also was magnets and coils, but it was on like 6 locomotive flat cars. And they'd have all these engines turning this thing, and the signal was so strong that they would couple it directly to the loudspeakers. So your key was a switch, and it would turn on the speaker. And sadly enough, none exist today. The last one in 1950 was scrapped because no museum wanted it. It would be the ultimate musical instrument that takes up a city block.
Was that invented in Russia?
No, I think, God, where was the guy from? Probably New York or something. It just shows us that they had some pretty serious drugs in the 20s. Like, who would have thought of something like that?
What's your next yard sale?
You know, I'm planning on having one. I keep saying in a month, and it's been in a month since April. Anyone know the Clinton Street area? Probably everyone.
Love it.
Crazy house, 13th and Clinton, mannequin legs, puppets in the window. I confess.
Now we can knock on your door.
Yeah, if you see a bunch of more random stuff than usual piled in the yard.
Cool.
Yeah, it actually turned into a reason to mess with a neighbor. The house across from me on 13th was bought by a developer, and he wanted my house and either the one behind it or John's. And he was going to take that house out and the one next to it that he had bought and put in. Do you know about this? Yeah, put in condos. And and he kept calling everyone else's house, the old Victorians in the neighborhood, eyesores. But you should have seen what he wanted. It's like a cardboard box with holes cut in it. Whatever, it's his property. And but when he started calling houses eyesores, that really encouraged me to come up with crazy stuff. And the beauty school up on Division was saving the practice haircutting heads. So when they get down to a total crew cut, they give them to me, because what do you do with them? And I know it's latex with styrofoam. It's still creepy, drilling holes through the eyes. But I remember putting laser pointers and putting them in the window, beaming on the house across the street.
And that's this guy's house?
Yeah. And he had some renters in it who thought it was pretty cool. But then I was up at my cabin, and I came across a bunch of old cow skulls from, God, who knows how many years ago. So I thought, decoration. So that's why the cow skulls are on the 13th side. I didn't put laser pointers in the eyes because I couldn't figure out how to get wires up to them.
I love that neighborhood.
So yeah, you could do anything. And if you did that in Hillsborough, where I grew up, you'd be shot. But you're pretty much encouraged to be weird in this area. So anyway, he ended up in money trouble, and he got the house refinanced once, and I thought, well, that's not fair. So that's when I brought up there's the row of puppets in the window. I do plan on eventually automating those so they sing "Good Morning Starshine" like the puppets. But anyway, when he went to refinance the house the last time, the bank refinanced the one furthest from me, but not the one next to me. I can only hope. So, left the decorations up. And I have accommodations on that upper porch for a movie, a slide projector, and I have some friends involved with estate sales who always give me bags of random photos from carousels that no one cares about. and you throw a bunch of slides in a carousel and project them randomly on the Mason Supply warehouse across the street.
So, in about a month, you'll have the sale. Is that
Are you going to be there? Are you going to be
Yeah.
camping in the yard?
I think we'll be camping.
Probably. I'm working on putting a basement door in, and the basement, since I've had the house, and probably for about the last 60 years, has never had a way to get to the outside. It's through the kitchen only, and it's a real skinny stairs. And I have packed it with stuff throughout the years. No baby clothes, no tools, well, maybe some weird tools, but anyway, yeah. And if someone's an artist or a musician and really wants something and can't afford it, I usually give it to them. My philosophy is number one priority is to get rid of stuff. And what's really amazing is I noticed this like 15 years ago when I had my first one, and I remember I had a Rhodes 88 suitcase piano, and I know some people know what that is, and you know, I just don't play it. I have enough other things like that. And one of my helpers said, well, bring out the electric piano. I said, no one in this neighborhood's going to know what it is. That was 15 years ago, and I didn't realize we'd turned the corner. And I dragged this thing out. I get it halfway out the front door. I hear these brakes lock, and this car backs up, and this gal yells out, how much for the Rhodes 88? So I didn't even have it open. It was still in the suitcase. So, okay. So I just started dragging out everything.
So did you give it to her, or did you sell it to her?
No, I sold it to her.
Okay.
I gave her, well, she brought her husband down, and he bought it. He been looking for one, so that was pretty cool. But I remember I got, and everything, I just don't want the stuff to come back in the house, and I get the prices down to like $10, $5, $1. And I had a sign that said everything 5 cents, and no one is stopping. But you put up the word free, and you immediately have a traffic jam. And I mean, it was weird. I remember this lady and some homeless guy were fighting over the top half of a medical gurney. She ended up winning, and I helped her get it on top of her Volvo. I said, what are you going to do with it? She said, well, I don't know.
Okay, well, I think she won.
And anyway, if you've noticed just random stuff piled out there, yes, I do have garbage service, but it has turned into sort of an unofficial free pile, and there was no such thing 15 years ago in Portland. Now, they're everywhere. Yeah. But sometimes I'll come out there and I find like a sofa without the cushions, or furniture with DNA stains, or you know, things that I don't really consider them free. I consider them kind of like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's okay. It comes with the territory. Questions?
I think we should.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Tobias, thank you for having me.
Mark, thank you so much. I think if you guys want, and if you have time, I think if you were too shy to try the theremin in front of all those people now, when everybody's distracted, this is your chance, so you should do it for sure.
If anyone wants to get a hold of me, I love talking about not only theremins, anything electronic, and I get plenty of weird questions. I gave you one example earlier, and if you want an automated tongue, that's okay.
All right, and I just want to say our next Curiosity Club is September 27th, and we have David Thorpe, Obed Valadez, and Tom Lakovich of Industry. Industry is a collective of creators, designers, thinkers, and makers in Portland, Oregon that have joined together to form a new design and innovation company. It was founded around the idea that cookie-cutter design processes do not work anymore, but that an adaptive and agile approach is a more relevant way to innovate. Based on the team's diverse experience in product, interactive experience, and brand design, they are rethinking the way design can quickly create value for companies looking to disrupt the way they currently bring innovations to market. So yeah, it's going to be awesome. All right.
Yeah, that's why I said probably we wind our own, but we wind them on PVC.
Oh, I'm sorry, I plugged it.
Dr. Purple left it.
Okay. Anyway, I'm still listening.
And then you
what it has to look like, so it's pretty confined there.
Well, what you were talking about the school.
There's a volume control. Next week, probably. Monthly. It's like in a violin. You don't have actual frets. It's a total feel.
And you can tune yourself too.
Yeah. It's one of those way too much practice things. There are all kinds of theories about aerial fingering, and like there are a lot of people that, in a polite way, they don't have a life. They talk about theremins on the internet all day long, every day. And anytime I do anything, they get excited. Like if they care about what I do, they're probably living in their mother's basement with their Star Trek glasses collection. Oh yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
You know, the paper team that owns the behind that I sort of I don't have access to this. There's no place where they run to. Because they built their own house from scratch. They didn't have something what I did in time. It's been there.
I have all the drawings.
Yeah.
Well, I